A police officer and his loyal German shepherd were driving through the rainy streets of Cleveland when they heard it, a faint cry cutting through the storm. They followed the sound and found her. A little girl, no older than 7, shivering outside a faded yellow house with painted flowers on the mailbox. She clutched a worn teddy bear and whispered, "Please don't take me away from Mommy." Those words shook the officer to his core. What he uncovered next would expose secrets hidden in the shadows and test his faith in justice, family, and redemption. What happened after will remind you that God's light can shine even on the cloudiest days. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from. Drop your country in the comments so we can see how far this story travels. And if you believe every child deserves love and protection, hit that subscribe button because this story might just change your heart. The winter wind swept across Cleveland, Ohio, carrying with it sharp needles of snow that painted the city in endless shades of gray and white. It was early evening, the kind of evening when streets emptied quickly and people hurried home, collars pulled high and scarves pressed tightly to their faces. The downtown buildings, half-lit and shrouded in drifting snowflakes, looked more like silent monuments than places of business. In the middle of this frozen world stood the old brick building of the Cleveland Police Department, its yellow lights flickering through frosted windows like a faint heartbeat against the storm. Inside, the warm air smelled of burnt coffee and paper files, a world still alive despite the dead quiet of the city outside. At his desk sat Sergeant Robert Hayes, a man of 58 whose years in uniform were written plainly across his body and his face. Robert was tall, broad-shouldered, with hair that had once been deep brown, but was now heavily streaked with gray. His hazel eyes carried both warmth and weariness, softened by crow's feet but sharpened by decades of experience. He wore his winter police jacket, its fabric scuffed at the elbows, a badge that had been polished more out of habit than pride. Robert was 3 days away from retirement, and the thought both relieved and unsettled him. A widower for over a decade, his wife had passed after a sudden illness, leaving him with a quiet house that no longer felt like home. The loss had aged him, giving him a gentleness toward children and the vulnerable, but also a loneliness he rarely admitted aloud. Tonight, as snow piled against the doors, he sipped lukewarm coffee and wondered what life after the badge would even mean. The station was nearly empty. A couple of younger officers moved between desks, their chatter echoing down the corridor. Phones rang occasionally, usually small neighborhood disturbances, a fender bender, a broken window, nothing serious. For Robert, the lull was almost too much. He preferred action to the endless waiting. He leaned back in his chair, gazing at the clock, when the front door slammed open with a gust of freezing air. All conversations in the room halted. Snow swirled into the lobby, and framed in the doorway stood a little girl no more than 8 years old. Her hair, a messy tangle of pale brown, clung damp to her forehead. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold, and her eyes, wide, round, and hazel-held, a mixture of terror and determination. She wore a thin pink coat that was ripped at one shoulder, hanging loosely around her small body, and her shoes were soaked through, their laces frayed. In her arms, she clutched a bundled infant, perhaps 9 months old, whose tiny face peeked from a tattered blanket. The baby's lips were tinged blue, his breathing ragged from the icy air. Beside them padded a German shepherd, about 6 years old, his body lean but muscular, his coat black and tan, though dulled by neglect. His amber eyes were alert, constantly scanning the room as if ready to lunge at the first sign of danger. A faded scar ran down his left hind leg, suggesting battles fought in another life. His ears stood tall, his chest proud, but there was a protective urgency in the way he positioned himself, half a step ahead of the children, his body shielding them from the unfamiliar officers. The dog's name, later revealed by the girl, was Max, and there was something noble in his bearing, a quiet reminder of a loyal guardian who had once known training and discipline, but was now living on instinct and sheer devotion. The officers froze for a moment, unsure what they were witnessing. Robert was the first to rise. "Sweetheart," he said gently, his voice carrying the deep timbre of age and authority, "are you all right?" The girl's knees buckled slightly as she tightened her hold on the baby. Her lips trembled and she whispered, "Mommy." Mommy said, "Find the police with kind eyes. Max brought us here." Her words came out broken, desperate, and then her eyes rolled back. She swayed dangerously. Robert moved quickly, years of instinct overriding his aching joints. He caught her just before she collapsed, cradling both her and the infant against his broad chest. The baby began to cry weakly, a thin sound that sliced through the quiet lobby. Max let out a deep growl, his eyes fixed on Robert as if to warn him not to hurt them. Robert met the dog's gaze with steady calm. "Easy, boy," he murmured, lowering his tone. "I'm here to help. They're safe." The dog hesitated, body tense, ears pricked forward. Then slowly his tail dropped slightly, the growl softening into a low rumble. He stepped closer, sniffing Robert's uniform, and then positioned himself right at Robert's side as if to say, "I will let you carry them, but I will be watching." A younger officer rushed forward. Officer Daniels, 27, tall and wiry with a mop of dark hair that never stayed neat, pulled out his phone and snapped a quick photo. Daniels had a tendency to chase stories as much as justice, his youthful eagerness often getting him into trouble. He muttered, "People need to see this." And before Robert could stop him, he posted the image on social media. A weary sergeant holding two fragile children, guarded by a scarred German shepherd, snow swirling around them. Daniels didn't realize that within hours that picture would spread across Cleveland and beyond, stirring outrage, compassion, and curiosity. Back in the station, Robert barked, "Call paramedics now!" Another officer dashed for the phone. Robert lowered the girl onto a bench, checking her pulse, then carefully adjusted the blanket around the infant. "Stay with me, sweetheart," he whispered, patting her damp hair. Her breathing was shallow, her small hands icy to the touch. Max whimpered, pacing in tight circles before settling at the girl's side, his head resting protectively across her lap. His amber eyes flicked constantly from Robert to the child's face, as though trying to calculate whether this man truly meant them well. Robert reached down and stroked the dog's head, rough fur warm beneath his gloved hand. "You did good, boy," he said softly. "You brought them home." When the ambulance arrived, chaos unfolded in a flurry of bright lights and urgent voices. Paramedics rushed the children onto stretchers, wrapping them in thermal blankets, checking vitals. Max snarled when one medic got too close, forcing Robert to grab his collar and reassure him. "It's okay, Max. They're here to help." The little girl stirred faintly, her lips barely forming words. "Don't leave," she whispered, her fingers clutching at Robert's sleeve with surprising strength. The plea struck him harder than any bulletproof vest ever had. For a brief moment, Robert saw his own daughter lost so many years ago in this fragile child's eyes. His throat tightened, but he forced a calm smile. "I'm not going anywhere." Snow hammered against the station windows as the ambulance pulled away, its sirens muffled in the storm. Robert followed close behind in his cruiser, Max jumping into the passenger seat uninvited, curling up but keeping his eyes on Robert the entire time. It was as if the dog had already made his decision. This man would be judged not by words, but by what he did next. For Robert, retirement suddenly felt irrelevant. He had no idea who these children were, where they had come from, or why their mother had sent them into the storm. All he knew was that fate had placed them in his hands tonight, and he could not, would not, turn away. The ambulance raced through the storm, sirens slicing through the snow-saturated night, while Robert Hayes followed close behind in his cruiser. Max sat rigidly in the passenger seat, the muscles along his shoulders taut, his amber eyes never leaving the flashing red and blue lights ahead. The dog's breathing was steady but sharp, his presence filling the cabin with a protective intensity. Robert couldn't help but glance at him between turns of the wheel. Max was no ordinary stray. There was discipline etched into the way he sat, the way his gaze darted to every shadow outside. Somewhere in this animal's past was training, commands, and loyalty burned deep into bone and memory. At Cleveland Memorial Hospital, the emergency entrance bustled with staff braving the icy gusts to help unload patients. Robert parked quickly and pushed through the sliding doors just as paramedics carried the children inside. The girl, Lily, was pale but conscious, her hazel eyes blinking in confusion under the harsh fluorescent lights. The baby, Ethan, coughed weakly as a nurse placed an oxygen mask over his face. Max padded in beside them, ignoring the signs that clearly said, "No animals allowed." He moved as though the rule simply did not apply to him. They were met by Dr. Rachel Morgan, the attending physician on duty. She was in her early 40s, with auburn hair tied back in a messy bun, tall and lean with sharp cheekbones and the kind of calm authority that silenced chaos in an instant. Her green eyes were focused, scanning charts and patients with quick precision. Years in emergency medicine had hardened her demeanor, but there was also compassion in the way she touched the children, gentle but firm. Rachel had lost a younger sister to untreated illness when she was a teenager. The memory had driven her into medicine, leaving her with a fierce intolerance for neglect. "Sergeant Hayes?" she asked, reading the name from his badge. "Both children are malnourished. The boy has early-stage pneumonia. We'll stabilize them, but we need to know who their guardian is." Robert shook his head. "All I know is the girl said her mother sent her something about cloudy days. Her name's Lily Parker." Rachel frowned, jotting notes. "We'll get social services involved. For now, they need fluids, warmth, and rest." She signaled for the children to be taken to adjoining examination rooms. Max tried to follow, but a security guard stepped in his path. The dog bared his teeth, a low growl vibrating in his chest. "Easy," Robert said quickly, putting himself between them. "He's with them. Let him stay. You'll have a riot on your hands otherwise." The guard hesitated, then backed off under Rachel's nod of approval. Max trotted into Lily's room, settling by her bed, his body curved protectively against the rails. A nurse entered, introducing herself as Ella Simmons, mid-20s, petite with short black hair tucked behind her ears. She wore pink scrubs dotted with cartoon animals and carried a clipboard that looked almost too large in her hands. Her demeanor was bright and soothing, her voice pitched to comfort children. Ella had grown up in foster care herself, cycling through temporary homes until she was 15, and it gave her a particular tenderness toward kids who arrived at the hospital frightened and alone. She knelt beside Lily, brushing the girl's damp hair back. "Hey, sweetheart, you're safe now. Can you tell me your name?" "Lily," the girl whispered, her voice strained. "And this is Ethan." Mommy said, "Find the police with kind eyes." Max knew the way Robert felt a shiver run down his spine. He crouched by the bedside, his large frame folding awkwardly but with a gentleness that belied his size. "Your mom told you to find me?" he asked softly. Lily nodded, clutching Max's ear as though it anchored her. "She has cloudy days and sunny days. On cloudy days she can't get up, but she said if the medicine was gone again, to come here." Her words tumbled out haltingly, each one carrying more weight than any child should bear. Rachel listened carefully, her sharp eyes softening. "Cloudy days," she repeated under her breath, recognizing the coded language of mental illness. "That sounds like she may be describing schizophrenia or bipolar episodes." She straightened, her voice clipped now. "Sergeant, we'll need to find the mother immediately. This is more than just medical neglect. This is a crisis." Before Robert could reply, Lily swayed weakly, her body trembling. Her small hand reached out blindly until it caught Robert's sleeve. "Don't leave," she murmured, eyes fluttering closed. Panic surged through Robert's chest, but Rachel placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "She's exhausted. Let her rest. She's safe for now." Robert exhaled slowly, nodding, though his heart hammered. He stood watch by her bed for hours, Max never moving except to press closer to Lily when she stirred. As dawn approached, the storm easing outside, Robert stepped into the hallway where Ella was updating charts. "Any word from social services?" he asked. Ella's smile faltered. "They're backed up. A caseworker might not arrive until tomorrow morning. They'll probably push for temporary placement." Her voice dipped lower. "I hate that. Kids get shuffled around so much. Sometimes it breaks them more than it helps." Robert rubbed his temple, fatigue pressing in. He had seen enough children lost in the system to know she was right. He glanced back at the room where Lily slept, Max curled like a shadow at her side, and something inside him tightened. He couldn't let her vanish into paperwork. Later that morning, Robert returned to check on Ethan. The infant's condition was stabilizing under oxygen and antibiotics. A pediatric resident explained his progress, Dr. Anil Patel, a young man in his early 30s, dark-skinned with kind brown eyes behind round glasses. He spoke gently, his words careful, shaped by years of comforting nervous parents. Anil had immigrated from India as a child, watching his own parents struggle to navigate healthcare, and he carried a quiet determination to treat every patient as if they were family. "The boy will recover fully with proper care," he assured Robert. But without intervention, another week in that cold house could have been fatal. Robert thanked him, then returned to Lily's bedside just as the girl stirred again. She blinked at him, her voice a fragile thread. "Mommy paints flowers on the mailbox. Yellow house. She said when the clouds come, I must remember Max will guide me. He remembers better than I do." Max lifted his head at the sound of his name, ears twitching. Robert reached down, scratching behind the dog's ear. "You did more than guide her," he murmured. "You saved them." For the first time since arriving, Robert allowed himself to sit. He sank into the chair by the bed, exhaustion pulling at his bones, yet his mind churned with determination. He knew one thing for certain: retirement could wait. The storm outside had brought this little family into his life, and until he found the mother, until he understood the truth behind the clouds, he wasn't going anywhere. The storm had passed by dawn, leaving Cleveland shrouded in a pale, icy quiet. Streets glistened under layers of frost, and the city felt suspended, as though holding its breath after the night's turmoil. For Sergeant Robert Hayes, there would be no rest. The words of the girl, "Yellow house, flowers on the mailbox," repeated in his mind like a mantra. Lily had given them the one clue to her world, and he intended to follow it. Retirement was no longer a thought. Duty had carved its way back into his bones. By mid-morning, Robert drove down toward Willow Street, Max riding in the passenger seat. The German shepherd sat with a regal poise, ears upright, eyes sharp as if scanning for threats. In the sunlight, his coat glimmered with streaks of black and brown, though still patchy in places, a reminder of long weeks without proper care. A faint scar across his flank seemed almost like a badge of honor, each step exuding both strength and weariness. He was not just a companion. He was a witness, perhaps the only one who had walked with Lily and Ethan through their silent suffering. Willow Street had once been a lively, working-class neighborhood, its houses painted in bright colors, porches filled with flowers, and children running barefoot along the sidewalks. But years of economic decline had hollowed it out. Many homes now sagged with peeling paint and boarded windows, roofs patched with tarps that flapped in the wind. Despite that, here and there stood small attempts at beauty. Wind chimes that still tinkled, a bicycle leaned against a railing, curtains drawn carefully in windows. The yellow house at the far end of the street was one such place. The paint had faded to a weary pale, the porch creaked under its own weight, but on the mailbox, bright flowers had been carefully painted by hand. Though chipped and uneven, they spoke of effort, of someone determined to preserve dignity against impossible odds. Plastic pinwheels lined the cracked walkway, spinning in the winter breeze like tiny defiant flags. Robert slowed the cruiser, his eyes narrowing with both suspicion and pity. "This has to be it," he murmured. Max whined softly, tail flicking once as if in agreement. On the porch waited Officer Michael Jenkins, Robert's younger colleague. Jenkins was in his early 30s, medium build, sandy blonde hair cut short, a faint scar across his jaw from a bar fight in his rookie years. He had an earnest face, the kind that made people instinctively trust him, though his eyes often carried too much eagerness. Jenkins had grown up with an alcoholic father, which had left him with a sharp intolerance for injustice and an almost desperate need to prove himself. He nodded as Robert stepped out of the cruiser. "Neighbors haven't seen Amanda since yesterday morning. I checked the windows before making entry. You should see it for yourself." The front door groaned open, revealing not chaos as Robert expected, but careful order. Inside, the house was sparsely furnished. A threadbare couch patched at the seams, a small table scarred by years of use, and a bookshelf filled with children's books organized meticulously by color. On the wall hung a framed crayon drawing labeled Lily's First Day of School, the handwriting precise, the letters traced slowly by a mother determined to preserve even the smallest milestones. Robert stepped further in, the air faintly tinged with detergent and something metallic like rust. The kitchen told a more desperate story. The refrigerator door was plastered with sticky notes in a neat system. One read, "Monday, Lily's lunch, peanut butter sandwich, no jelly left." Another, "Cloudy day, Lily knows where the emergency food is." Inside the fridge, there was little but a plastic container with macaroni and cheese, a note taped on top, "For my sunshine, eat it all." Robert's chest tightened as he read the careful handwriting. "Bills are on the table. Jenkins said quietly, pointing to a stack. Each envelope was opened and annotated in the same neat script. Pay first. Pay if possible. Apologize. Explain next month. At the top was a prescription receipt with Amanda Parker's name, the word medicine underlined multiple times. Next to it lay a budget notebook, its pages filled with numbers that simply refused to balance. Lines crossed out painfully. New shoes for Lily changed to fix Lily's shoes. Then my medication with a trembling question mark. Robert picked it up, his throat tight. She was trying, he muttered. God help her, she was trying. In the bedroom, they found a calendar on the wall marked with colored dots. Green for good days, yellow for okay, blue for cloudy. The last 3 days were circled in red, the word emergency scrawled across them. On the dresser was a child's drawing taped to the mirror. 2 stick figures, one big, one small, holding hands with a third figure in uniform labeled the nice police lady. Robert stared at it, frowning. She must have seen one of us before. Someone who made an impression. The master bedroom carried the heaviest weight. A journal lay open on the nightstand, the handwriting alternating between neat and erratic. One entry read, "Good day today. Pancake faces for breakfast." Lily laughed, proud of her homework. A later one trembled across the page. "Clouds coming. Took extra medication. Richard promised to check tomorrow." The most recent was chilling. "Medicine gone again. Richard says insurance denied refill." Don't believe him. Lily's pain worse. Afraid they'll take her if they see me like this. Robert's jaw tightened. Richard? He had no last name yet, but the implication was clear. Someone had been controlling Amanda's access to medication, and likely her finances. It wasn't just illness tearing this family apart, it was manipulation. They moved into Lily's room, a striking contrast. Secondhand furniture had been painted in cheerful colors, books lined up on a small shelf, and stuffed animals sat in a perfect row on her neatly made bed. On her desk lay an assignment titled My Hero. The crayon drawing showed a woman with long brown hair holding hands with a small girl. The words below read, "My mom is my hero because she fights the clouds for me. She teaches me on good days so I remember on cloudy days. We are a team forever." Robert's eyes burned. He snapped photographs of everything. These weren't signs of neglect, but of desperate, fragile love. "Sergeant," Jenkins called softly from the kitchen. Robert found him pointing to a small table where a prescription bottle lay empty, next to a note in shaky handwriting. "Emily, if the clouds get too bad, find the police lady with kind eyes. She helped that boy in the park. Tell her mommy is lost but trying to come home. I love you, sunshine." The word struck Robert like a blow. Emily Lily's full name. Amanda had left a breadcrumb trail not out of abandonment but of hope. She knew she was losing control and had prepared her daughter for it. As Robert pocketed the note, a voice startled them from the doorway. Mrs. Eleanor Briggs, a neighbor in her late 60s, had approached after seeing the cruiser outside. She was a short, plump woman with gray hair pulled into a bun, her warm brown eyes tired but kind. Years of living alone after her husband's death had given her both resilience and suspicion of outsiders. "I knew something was wrong," she said, wringing her hands. Amanda always tried, even on her cloudy days. She bought fruit for Lily even when she couldn't afford much else, but that man, Richard, he's trouble. I saw him yelling at her more than once. Robert stepped toward her. "Richard Moore?" he asked, remembering the name from the journal. Eleanor nodded. Tall, dark hair, sharp jaw, always in a leather jacket. Thought he was too smooth for this neighborhood. Kept talking to people from the council, men in suits. Didn't like the way he looked at Amanda like she was something to control. Robert exchanged a glance with Jenkins. The pieces were forming, a mother struggling against mental illness, a manipulative man feeding on her weakness, and children caught in the crossfire. Outside, Max sat on the porch, his amber eyes fixed on the street as if he sensed danger approaching. The wind shifted, rattling the pinwheels. Robert closed the journal and slipped it into an evidence bag. Whatever retirement he had planned was gone. The fight ahead wasn't just about rescuing 2 children. It was about dismantling the grip of a predator and restoring dignity to a family that had nearly been erased by the system. The evidence from the yellow house weighed heavily on Robert's mind as he drove back to the precinct. Max sat quietly in the back seat, though his ears twitched at every passing sound, the taut line of his body betraying restless energy. Robert glanced in the rearview mirror. The dog looked as though he was waiting for the next move in a game he had played all his life, a soldier without orders who refused to stand down. Jenkins followed in his own patrol car, his young face grim as he thought about the journal entries and the little girl's desperate drawings. At the station, word had already spread. The photo officer Daniels had posted the night before was everywhere, plastered across news feeds and shared thousands of times. Robert didn't care much for technology, but he couldn't ignore the ripple effect it had caused. The public was demanding answers. Who were these children? Why were they alone in the snow? And who was responsible for their suffering? For once, pressure might work in his favor. As he stepped into the lobby, a commotion drew his attention. Standing at the front desk, speaking in a voice smooth and falsely concerned, was a man who fit Eleanor Briggs's description perfectly. Richard Moore was in his early 40s, tall with dark slicked-back hair, a square jaw, and eyes that were a little too calculating behind his forced smile. He wore a black leather jacket over a dress shirt open at the collar, projecting a strange mix of casual charm and menace. His posture was relaxed, but his gaze flickered nervously around the room, cataloging exits, officers, and potential threats. "I'm just here to check on Amanda's kids," Richard was saying, his tone dripping with manufactured worry. "She hasn't been well, and I'm practically their stepfather. I think it's only right I take them home once they're cleared." Robert's hazel eyes hardened. "You must be Richard Moore." Richard turned, flashing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "And you must be the sergeant who found them. Glad to see they're safe. Amanda's been struggling, but I've done my best to hold things together." Before Robert could respond, Max padded forward from behind him, lips curling into a low growl, hackles raised. The sound was primal, vibrating through the lobby. Richard's smile faltered. His hand twitched toward his jacket pocket, then froze. Max's amber eyes locked on him, unblinking, as though he could smell the lies clinging to the man's skin. "Funny thing," Robert said evenly, "Amanda's journal suggests you weren't holding things together at all. In fact, it looks like you were draining her finances and controlling her medication." Richard's face stiffened for a fraction of a second before his mask returned. "People with mental illness write all kinds of things. You can't take her word at face value." It was at that moment that Detective Laura Green entered the room. She was in her late 30s, tall and slim, with dark brown hair streaked with gray tied neatly at the back. Her blue-gray eyes were sharp, a constant flame of suspicion behind them, and her navy wool coat hung over her shoulders like armor. Laura had built her reputation on dismantling white-collar crime schemes, particularly ones that preyed on the vulnerable. Growing up with a mother who had battled depression, she had little patience for men like Richard. "Actually," Laura said, setting a file down on the desk, "we have witnesses who saw you screaming at Amanda in front of that yellow house. And we also have neighbors who say you were cozying up with members of the city council, trying to push families out of Willow Street for some redevelopment project. Looks to me like you weren't just Amanda's problem, you're everyone's problem." Richard's charm cracked slightly, his jaw tightening. "This is ridiculous. You've got no proof of any of that." Laura raised an eyebrow. "Give us time. Men like you always leave paper trails." The conversation escalated when Margaret Linwood, a social worker in her 50s, arrived. Margaret was of average height, with salt and pepper hair tucked into a bun, glasses perched low on her nose, and a face lined with years of quiet patience. She carried a clipboard hugged tightly to her chest. Margaret had spent decades fighting bureaucracy on behalf of children, often clashing with police when their priorities didn't align. But she respected Robert's dedication. She greeted him with a nod before turning her focus on Richard. "We'll need to determine custody placement immediately," she said firmly. "Until Amanda is located and stable, the children cannot return to an unsafe environment. Mr. Moore, you are not a legal guardian, and given these reports, you will not be considered." Richard's smooth demeanor finally snapped. "You can't just take them away from me. Amanda wouldn't survive without me." His voice was louder now, his mask slipping to reveal the iron beneath. Max lunged forward, restrained only by Robert's hand on his collar. The growl that ripped from his throat silenced the room. For a brief second, Richard's bravado faltered entirely. He stepped back, his shoes squeaking on the polished floor. His hand brushed his jacket pocket again, and Robert caught it, gripping his wrist hard enough to make the man flinch. "You're done here," Robert said, his voice low but lethal. "We'll be looking into your finances, your council friends, and your connection to Amanda's medication." Until then, stay away from those kids. Jenkins stepped forward to escort Richard out, the younger officer's jaw tight with anger. As they passed, Richard leaned close to Robert, his voice a whisper meant only for him. "You don't know what you're getting into, old man. People bigger than me want Willow Street cleared. You'll regret sticking your nose where it doesn't belong." Robert didn't flinch. He watched as Richard was led out, Max snarling until the door shut behind him. Later in the briefing room, Laura spread out files showing links between Richard and a shadowy redevelopment company, one that had already forced families out of neighboring districts. Margaret warned that social services might still push to separate Lily and Ethan temporarily, citing safety concerns. Robert's frustration boiled over. They don't need separation. They need stability. If you throw them into foster care now, after everything they've survived, it'll break them. Margaret sighed, adjusting her glasses. "I know. I'll do what I can, but policy is policy." Max, lying by Robert's chair, lifted his head and gave a soft whine, as though echoing his protest. Robert scratched his ear absently, his mind already racing. If Richard had hinted at something larger, then Amanda's tragedy was not an isolated story, it was tied to a system of exploitation. And if the city council was involved, then the children's safety was in far greater danger than anyone in the room yet realized. By evening, news stations were already circling the story. The viral photo had become the centerpiece of a debate about poverty, mental health, and corruption in Cleveland. Citizens demanded answers, donations poured in for Lily and Ethan, and reporters camped outside the hospital. For Robert, the battle lines were clear: protect the children, find Amanda, and dismantle whatever scheme Richard was part of. Retirement would have to wait, because justice wasn't done yet. The next morning in Cleveland dawned gray, the sky heavy with clouds that promised rain. Robert Carter drove through the quiet streets with Max in the back, the dog's black and tan fur glinting in the dim light. The German shepherd sat alert, his sharp amber eyes watching the world outside as if he knew storms both in the sky and in people were coming. Robert's thoughts churned. Richard's threat from the night before echoed in his mind, and he knew the fight had moved beyond a single family into something much bigger. At the precinct, Detective Laura Green had already spread documents across the conference table. Her slim figure was bent over spreadsheets, her blue-gray eyes scanning financial transactions with a hawk's precision. She had barely slept, her dark hair pulled back in a loose bun, streaks of gray glinting under the fluorescent light. "I traced some of Richard Moore's connections," she said without looking up. "Turns out he isn't working alone. He's tied to a development group called Horizon Properties Front for a bigger corporate scheme. They've been buying up blocks of neighborhoods like Willow Street, using intimidation to drive families out." Robert leaned against the table, arms crossed. So he wasn't lying when he said bigger people were involved. "No," Laura replied sharply, "and they have friends on the city council. If we don't move carefully, we'll find ourselves buried in red tape or worse." The door opened and Margaret Linwood, the seasoned social worker, entered with a tall man in his early 40s at her side. He wore a clean but worn navy suit, his tie slightly crooked, his expression lined with fatigue. His name was Attorney Mark Reynolds, a public defender known in Cleveland for taking cases no one else wanted. With sandy blonde hair thinning at the temples, steel gray eyes, and a steady, patient voice, he had built a reputation for defending the voiceless. Margaret introduced him. "Sergeant Carter, Detective Green, this is Mark Reynolds. He's agreed to represent Amanda Mitchell once she's located. He's one of the few lawyers willing to challenge Horizon Properties in court." Mark offered a firm handshake. "I've seen Horizon destroy entire neighborhoods. If Amanda's family is caught in their web, she needs proper defense. From what I hear, she's both a victim of illness and exploitation." Robert nodded. "Then you're in the right place. But first we need to find her." Hours later, Robert and Laura headed to Willow Street with Max, hoping to track Amanda. The rain had started, fine droplets streaking down the windshield. They parked near a faded diner, the kind of place where locals nursed coffee for hours. Inside, the scent of bacon and frying potatoes lingered. A waitress in her 50s with curly black hair streaked with silver wiped down a table. Her bright brown eyes narrowed when she saw their badges. Her name was Clara Jennings, a plump woman with a cafe apron tied around her waist. She had lived in Cleveland all her life and ran the diner for 20 years. Clara had a sharp tongue but a soft heart, often slipping free meals to children she knew were hungry. "You're looking for Amanda Mitchell, aren't you?" she asked bluntly. Robert studied her. "You've seen her?" Clara sighed, tucking her cloth into the apron pocket. "She came in 2 nights ago. Looked thin as paper, eyes darting like she was being hunted. Ordered coffee, didn't touch it. She asked if anyone had seen her kids. Then she left when a black SUV parked outside. I thought she might collapse," Laura scribbled notes. "Did you catch the license plate?" Clara shook her head. "But I remember the driver. Richard. He's been in here plenty, always pretending to be generous, buying rounds for strangers while squeezing Amanda dry. Men like him make me sick." Max shifted uneasily under the table, his ears pricking at the sound of Richard's name. Robert reached down to steady him. Clara leaned closer. "Amanda's not crazy, you know. People talk, but I've seen her with those kids on her good days. She loves them fiercely. She's just had too many storms without an umbrella." As they left the diner, Laura's phone buzzed. A message from Jenkins. Bus station reported a disoriented woman matching Amanda's description taken to St. Mary's Clinic. Robert swung the cruiser toward the clinic, Max pressing against the seat, sensing urgency. At St. Mary's, the waiting room smelled of antiseptic. Amanda Mitchell sat slumped in a chair, blonde hair tangled, her thin frame wrapped in a donated sweater. Her pale face carried both exhaustion and shame, her blue eyes flickering with fear when Robert approached. "Amanda," Robert said gently, kneeling beside her. "I'm Sergeant Carter. We have your children. They're safe." Tears welled instantly.
"Lily? Ethan? They're alive?"
Her voice cracked, disbelief etched in every word. "Yes," Robert reassured, his hand steady on her trembling shoulder. "They're at the hospital. They've been asking for you." Laura stepped forward, her expression softer than usual. "Amanda, we know about Richard, about the medication, the threats. You're not alone anymore." Amanda's sobs shook her body as she whispered, "He said if I told anyone, they'd take my babies away. He said I wasn't fit to be a mother." Robert's chest tightened. He thought of Sarah, his late wife, and her own struggles with depression after their daughter was born. He remembered how close he had come to losing her to despair, and how the system had almost failed them. He would not let it happen again to this woman. Max edged closer, resting his massive head against Amanda's knee. The warmth startled her, and for the first time in days, she smiled faintly. "He remembers me. I used to slip him scraps when you brought him around Willow Street. I didn't think he'd remember." Robert glanced at Max, who wagged his tail gently. The bond was small, but it was a start. Back at the hospital, the reunion was raw and overwhelming. Lily clung to her mother's waist, sobbing, while baby Ethan giggled at the familiar scent. Doctors stood by, reminding everyone that Amanda needed rest and treatment, but no one could break the embrace between mother and children. Meanwhile, Laura and Robert met with Mark Reynolds in a small consultation room. The lawyer flipped through documents Jenkins had pulled from Richard's apartment, a half-burned notebook, receipts showing money transfers to Horizon Properties, and notes about council meetings. "This isn't just fraud," Mark said, his gray eyes flashing. "It's racketeering. If we tie Richard to Horizon and Horizon to city officials, we can crack the entire operation wide open." Outside the window, the storm had finally broken, rain pounding against the glass. Robert stared out, thinking of Richard's smug warning. It wasn't just about Amanda anymore. It was about families like hers, entire neighborhoods being swallowed by greed. And he realized something. Retirement would never sit right while children like Lily and Ethan were caught in the crossfire. That night, as Amanda rested in her hospital bed and the children slept nearby, Robert stood with Max in the dimly lit hallway. The German shepherd leaned against his leg, a silent sentinel. "We're in it now, boy," Robert murmured, rubbing Max's ear. "But this time, we're not just fighting for one family. We're fighting for all of them." Max gave a soft bark, as if to say he was ready. The storm outside raged on, but inside the hospital walls, a fragile light of hope had taken root. Sometimes the greatest miracles do not come with thunder or lightning, but in the quiet courage of a little girl who runs for help, in the loyal bark of a faithful dog, or in the steady hands of a police officer who refuses to give up. This story reminds us that even in the darkest storms, God's light can shine through the people He places in our path. Every day, in our own lives, we may pass by someone who is silently carrying heavy burdens. We may not see their pain, but we have the power to be the answer to their prayer, the reminder that God has not forgotten them. Just as Robert, Max, and the community stood together for Amanda and her children, we too are called to be instruments of hope and compassion. If you believe that God still works miracles through love, kindness, and courage, take a moment to share this story with someone who needs encouragement. Leave a comment with your thoughts. Subscribe to our channel to hear more stories of faith and hope, and join us in praying for families everywhere who are struggling in silence. Write Amen in the comments if you believe that God's grace can bring healing and protection to those who need it most. May the Lord bless you and your loved ones with peace, strength, and the courage to keep going, even on cloudy days.